Hello, everyone. On behalf of IBM Systems Magazine, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation. My name is Janine Donnelly. I'm the manager of webinars for IBM Systems Magazine, and I will be the moderator for today's event. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. You may ask a question at any time during the event by entering it into the Q&A panel. If you experience technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Q&A panel to alert us, and someone will assist you. You may download a PDF version of the slide deck by clicking on the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources. You'll find that on the left side of your screen, and you can download those right from the platform without being disconnected from the webinar. Today's webinar, IBM's Great Debate, Security versus Systems Maintenance, is brought to you by Help Systems. I'd like to introduce you to our featured speaker today, Robin Tatam, Director of Security Technology at Help Systems. Robin, you now have the floor.
Janine, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Hello, thank you for spending a little bit of time with me today. I am very honored and pleased to be speaking to you about a topic that I certainly discuss with a lot of people, which is whether security should take a backseat to traditional day-to-day systems maintenance or vice versa. So my role here at Help Systems around evangelizing the security message, of course, is to help people understand where those priorities fall and what the interaction is between those two particular topics. Feel free to reach out to me at any time with regards to security questions that you may have on the platform, and I hope to see you at Common here in the spring in just a short amount of time, and we'll talk to you about security there as well. So our topic today is IBM's Great Debate, and part of this stemmed from a presentation that was done in 2018 that kind of spawned a Twitter hashtag of security or maintenance. And this was part of an overall discussion around some banter that was happening between several members of the IBMI speaking community with regards to whether they felt that the maintenance aspect of getting a system up to date was more or less important as securing the platform, something that traditionally we have been renowned as being. And so this kind of elicited what we called the IBMI Security Smackdown. It was a fun event that was hosted and involved participation between myself on the security side in that ring, and then Larry Bolhuis, a name that many of you know, have been in the IBMI community for a long time, speaking to the importance and necessity for having good maintenance practices and why those potentially need to be organized first. Now, as I said, many of you know Larry. He is actually the Common president currently and an all-around great guy. He has been on the platform probably, I would say, more years even than I have, which is saying something. But certainly the transition from dark hair to gray hair speaks to his significant amount of expertise in this space, and it was really a fun event. This did spawn, as I said, a lot of conversation. People were weighing in on whether they felt security needed to come first or second, and how their maintenance practices were impacted by the recent addition of, or the recent attention, I should say, that has been placed on securing the platform. A couple of statements that I think that came out of that conversation, which were relevant, was my perspective that, you know, if you don't have security in place, then really as far as managing it, there's really nothing left to manage, because if it's been breached or if it's been attacked, we really have to question whether that system is in a valid state. Larry's perspective was that you need to manage the system, otherwise really the security controls may not be there in order for you to apply them. So there certainly was two different stances taken here. Now, I think from my side of it, I think the battle went quite well. I threw a significant number of punches. I think while Larry put forward, you know, some decent arguments, I think ultimately it was pretty much a good pounding from the side of security and showing that security is much more relevant into today's market than the maintenance side of the discussion. And really there's a lot of catch-up that needs...
Wait a second.
Janine, I think there's a line open here. I think we've got somebody on.
excuse me. I think security is a little lax here because this is Larry, and I'd like to take a different position to that getting pounded situation here.
Well, I guess your perspective, we'll have to perhaps agree to disagree. But folks, this is great. Larry, I didn't know you were coming, but this is going to, I think, add some color perhaps to this conversation and the idea perhaps that I may be a little bit biased and have a different perspective from you. So welcome back. I think this will be a good discussion if you're willing to hang with me here for a little bit longer.
Sure, I think we can duke it out again, and I think folks will see that it wasn't quite as lopsided maybe as you made it out.
All right.
There.
All right. Well, one thing, Larry, I do want to offer up that it's 2019 now. We had the Smackdown last year, and I think it was a fun event. What I'd like to offer is perhaps we be a little more sophisticated. I think people need to be a little nicer to one another, and so why don't we position this? Let's have a debate. Let's make it a little bit more friendly. And certainly I know between you and I, the number of discussions we have, it might sink a little bit below that, but certainly I think we can both offer up a valuable perspective and get a feel for really what the IBMI community is facing currently. Now, before you get excited, Larry, at the sight of a sandwich, I know you're a big guy like me, and you're probably drooling right now. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is a debate that stems from the idea that, full-time, many of us are tied up in a lot of maintenance projects. And traditionally, security has kind of been what I call an after-lunch project. Really what I mean by that is the idea that, we'll get to it. We know it's important. We'll maybe work on it this afternoon or next Thursday. And because maintenance projects tend to be all-consuming, that ultimately we're just not getting to the security part of the discussion. So what we were really wanting to talk about is the idea that security should stop taking a backseat and really needs to kind of come more to the forefront so that it's not going to be 10 years down the road when we're still talking about the same things that the state of security study has been identifying as challenges and vulnerabilities in the IBMI world for the last 15 years. So what I'd like to do, Janine, is maybe start off with a poll to our audience just to get a feel from them with regards to whether they have any particular maintenance projects that they're working on initially here, and whether there is anything that's kind of maybe distracting them, if you will, from the idea that perhaps security is the new initiative in 2019 in what we're working on. So Larry, this will give you some feedback, I guess, as to probably what you see going on and where your skills are in demand as it pertains to either hardware or operating system upgrades and whether people are doing these things.
Sure. Yeah, it'll be good to see because as everybody knows, Power 9 is now mainstream and we're seeing those installed left and right. IBMI 7.3 has been rock solid for a couple of years already, so we're seeing lots of people that have finally admitted that.
Yep.
And so yeah, be good to see how many folks are going each way here.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly there always tends to be a cyclical process around those upgrades, and or at least when I worked on them. Is that still the case? You've got that 36-month lease cycle, and people tend to kind of refresh their hardware and then go dormant for a few years. Is that still the case?
It is. We do see occasionally folks try to push it to 4 years now because the capabilities of the machines are so high. But counterbalancing that, what you really see is a lot of folks moving to cloud. And so when you move into a cloud, and when I say cloud, it's not the kind of cloud that you might think of with your Gmail, for example, where you don't know or kind of don't care where the server is.
Yep.
Most of the folks in the I space are doing it where they pick a hosting provider and they put their operating environment into a cloud. And the beauty of cloud, at least one of them, is you don't have to worry about that cycle anymore. So now it comes along and you say, hey, we're ready for 7.3. We want to get on to i7.3. You don't have to say, well, shoot, I'm running a Power 6. I can't do that.
Yep. So some of that has been simplified.
Yeah. So yeah,
and that's
Okay,
fantastic.
Robin.
Yep.
Changes.
I'll go ahead and launch the results of this poll. Kind of interesting. It really settled into kind of two buckets, 50-50.
Yeah, and we're seeing upgrades of hardware and software. Some folks still considering it, and some folks pretty sure that they're not going to be doing any of those types of activities. So I agree, Larry. The cloud is interesting, and it certainly puts a spin from a security side as well, in that people have a tendency to then look at security as somebody else's problem. And in the reality of things, the data still belongs to them, and in many instances, while the operational aspect of the system is perhaps handled by the service provider, the security isn't necessarily done by them, other than perhaps the perimeter security, right? The internals, the application, and data security isn't necessarily handled by that.
That's true, but remember, it does add another layer of security or twist, because if you're on shared hardware, shared storage, shared networking,
absolutely,
another set of security. So have we done ourselves a favor, or have we hurt ourselves in there in some cases?
Different considerations, absolutely. So the first question I kind of want to ask here and have some discussion about is the idea that the IBM I platform is so solid, so secure, that really it's pretty hands-off. And I think many of us that have been on the box a long time and lived in the community for a while recognize that it is much lower maintenance, if you will, than some other operating systems that shall remain nameless. And do we really feel that's a valid reputation? Is that something that is where we can sit back and kind of put our feet up and not worry about it? I'll let you go first. Talk about the reliability, maybe the maintenance aspect of it.
Yeah, so obviously it is a reliable platform. It wouldn't have lasted this long and maintained all the capabilities that it has without being reliable. And without question, there's less impact to some of the security vulnerabilities because of the way it's used. Just to contrast, some of those other operating systems, we don't have to name them because it's anything that runs on your desktop has a browser.
Yep.
So that kind of technology doesn't exist in IBM I because it's a server. So in some ways, A, it is reliable, no question, and B, there are certain ways that we don't see that vulnerability being picked up. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist because, oh shoot, your laptop has a browser and it's connected to the server.
And everything's connected to everything, right?
That is a big piece too, and that is one of the reasons to where the joke back in the day was, how do you secure a System 34? You take the Twin-X cables out of the back. You're done. And today there's only one or two cables coming out of the back of our power system, and they both say Ethernet. And if you disconnect them, the whole thing becomes pointless. Yep. So yeah, it is reliable, and the fixes, as they come out with PTFs, IBM is very descriptive for the most part. Yes, some of them do say, security vulnerability, and I get that, but it's not the waterfall level of patches that you see on many other operating systems that love to say, Patch Tuesday or whatever.
Sure. Yep, absolutely. I guess from my side of the equation, the security discussion really goes back to this envious reputation that the system has had, back from even the System 3X days, but especially, the birth of the AS400 and as it led through its various evolutionary path, is that the system is secure. And to me, I still hear that. In fact, I heard a senior IBMer present this in an opening keynote speech at a conference just a few months ago. And, on one hand, I absolutely agree. I love this platform. I know what it's capable of. But on the other hand, I tend to cringe a little bit because the word secure really implies that work has already been done, right? It's already in a secure state. And the way I paint this is that the platform is secureable. It is capable of being secure, just like a padlock is, but when it's in its unlocked state, which the vast majority of power system servers currently are, then we're really not protected. And unfortunately, what that leads to is this perception of security and a false sense of security that the platform is already pre-configured, ready to roll, plug it in, load up the applications, and will never be breached. And that really is a dangerous fallacy that I want people to understand. Yes, The capabilities are there. Yes, it is securable, but it takes work to get into that state. It's not naturally pre-configured that way. Good stuff. Well, great platform on both sides, but it takes a little bit of work and TLC. It's not completely hands-off. Now, another thing that I hear, Larry, and I'm sure you do just because you're out in the community so much, is the idea that the platform's never been hacked, there's no viruses on the platform. This, again, is something that I've heard come out of many different people's mouths at different levels. And I think really it needs to come with a disclaimer. It can't be a blanket statement. So Larry, I know I've heard this many, many times. Is this something you've come across in your travels that we don't have to necessarily worry because there are no documented examples of this?
Yeah, so this is one of those things where it kind of comes down to semantics, right? Because while we don't have documented examples of IBM, the primary operating system, being hacked, there's not been documented programs running in QSys that have a virus in them that are emailing QSecOff or passwords, for example.
Yep.
That doesn't mean there's no viruses on the machine, and we can be Typhoid Mary very, very simply because we have an IFS and we have people storing stuff there. And I've seen it in my customer base. People
Yep.
have gotten virus-infected files on the system. Now, so there's that semantics thing. Does that mean it's not infected because that program didn't actually infect IBM? Or is it infected because, as it turns out, in the specific case I'm thinking of, the program absolutely affected the usability of the machine because it was, believe it or not, the Notepad virus, and all it did was it looked for copies of Notepad on every network share trying to infect them. And since everybody in the place had the virus, including every Notepad copy that had been backed up to IBM's IFS, the net server was consuming all the resources on the machine trying to find copies
Sure.
of Notepad to infect. So,
Absolutely.
Are you affected? I think so.
So
yeah.
I take the same stance. Like you said, you've got to qualify it a little bit. There is that disclaimer. When we talk about IBM, we tend to think of the native part of the system. But ultimately, IBM is the entire system. The integrated file system is not a bolt-on to the OS. It is part of the OS. And those file structures are more than capable of hosting infected files. In fact, one of the most clear-cut cases we saw, and you can see the screenshot here, and hey, it's a green screen spool file. Nothing gets more honest and upfront than that. There was almost a 500,000 viruses on this machine, or virally infected files, and by the time we scanned it, we had done some work with them, but we can see here that there are, tens of thousands, actually more than hundreds of thousands of viruses on one particular system. And the other thing we've got to be careful of is that we say it won't infect an RPG program or a physical file, and I absolutely agree with that. But what we're not covering in that statement is that there is potential that a virus or malware activity could involve the deletion or renaming of those types of objects. And if the virus is running through a connection that perhaps was established by a user with all object, then now we have pretty much a free-for-all. And a lot of times people have high availability. They're replicating their applications and even their operating system from system to system. And that's a great measure to implement for unplanned outages, on a hardware level or software level. It doesn't really help in this activity because it blindly replicates. So if I delete your customer master file or your payroll application, the HA is going to ensure that it's deleted off the other machine as quickly as possible. And so sometimes I think we have, again, this tendency to think that we're safe when really the reality is that IBM is highly virus resistant as an operating system, but there are many aspects of that platform potentially that could be exploited simply because we're not thinking in the right terms. The other side of that is, the reference to the platform has never been hacked. And unfortunately, you've got to be careful how you define the word hack, because most of us think of it as everything is locked down as tight as it possibly can be, and some criminal element has still managed to break or force their way in. And I would agree that there's really no documented cases of that happening on IBM. Unfortunately, the most common aspect of a data breach is actually an exploitation. It's utilizing tools and taking advantage of configuration that perhaps is misconfigured or not configured at all. And there is actually a documented case of that. Verizon's data breach study outlined an invasion into a quote-unquote AS400 back in 2016 that involved manipulation of chemical valves that were treating a water chemical plant. Very scary stuff. It didn't really hack the system because I believe it was the QSEC offer password was actually stored in the clear in a text file on a web server. So can you blame quote-unquote AS400 for that? I would offer that you can't. But it's no less damaging, it's no less impactful when those types of things happen. So again, we have to be careful with how we define some of these delimiters, whether it's the term IBMI, whether it is the term hack, whether it's the term virus, and understand that we are vulnerable, in some instances perhaps more vulnerable than other operating systems, because we're just not expecting it to happen. We're in denial.
I think that's a key point, and I have run into it several times in my career, and probably the single most blatant was asked to install an emulator so one of my customers could access one of their vendors' servers, and it turned out to be IBMI. And so being the nosy guy that I was, I tried to sign on as Q user, and by gum I got on, and then found out because the password was still Q user, and then found out that Q user had all object. And so being the good guy that I am, I called the vendor. I called the guy in work contact information because I had the authority to bring that up and get his name and number. And to add to your previous point, you know what he told me? Go ahead and make a mess of something. We have HA. We'll just switch systems. And you can't make this stuff up. I mean,
yeah, you can't. You can't, and that's a hard lesson to learn when it actually happens. And we have seen that where a virus went through and did a bunch of renames on file directories in the IFS, and of course it was instantly renamed on the backup machine as well. So it did them no good, and that's what they bet the bank on, was to be able to do that role swap. And when we took that out of the mix, then they were scrambling to figure out what they were going to do next. So Larry, the next thing I want to talk about is kind of this sense of, reverse obsolescence, where we have a system, it works perfectly well. You mentioned that the lease cycle perhaps has gone from a 3-year to extend out to a 4-year, which makes sense. I think the horsepower is so in excess of what most businesses require at this point that they can live on the technology longer. So I know I run across this, and I'm sure you do, where we have an older system, it's running on an older operating system, perhaps unsupported at this point, and it's running the application just fine. And the question always comes, I've got lots of things that I have to spend money on. Why would I spend it on a server that is functioning just fine? I don't have to put a whole lot of TLC into it, and when I could be spending that money elsewhere. Do you have thoughts? How do you encourage people to look at this as part of an overall plan, be it security or maintenance oriented?
Well, there's multiple factors, and in fact, one that just recently popped its head up here on January 1st of 2019, stepping back one release further than the 6.1 that we're showing here, in V5R4, in your service action log, that's the tool that's used in service tools when you fail a hard drive to replace it, any date with a 19, or for that matter 20, doesn't work. So at this point, how do you fix that failed hard drive? The operating system says, sorry, there's no such date as 19, therefore you couldn't have had a disk fail then. Uh-oh. So it's
kind of Y2K biting us again.
It is, and because the V5R4 is completely unsupported, as, by the way, is V6R1, although we've not noted this problem in 6.1 yet. It probably will happen in 2030 or something. We're not sure. That's a guess.
2039, yeah.
Yeah, 2039, yeah. So the issue we're seeing then is, lack of availability to suddenly maintain. We're starting to see parts availability in some of these things is starting to go down. Repairability, even if you can get parts, one of the things we talk to folks about is, okay, that Power 6 has run for a long, long time. But when it dies, and it's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when, it might still be 5 more years. I don't know. But you could also have fire, flood, electrical issues, pestilence, etc., to take it out that is outside the realm of the server.
Yep.
Repairability, mean time to repair is going way up because A, the people that know how to fix those really well are retiring. B, the parts are becoming farther and fewer between. So it's starting to become an issue. And here's the one that's really been whacking a lot of my customers, and some of you in the audience have probably had this. You get that email or that letter in some cases from one of your vendors, we will no longer accept connections on TLS 1.0. Great. We got to go to TLS 1.2.
Yep.
6.1 don't do that. So,
So that's certainly my sense too. Yeah, on the security side, you're exactly right. It's the idea that maintenance is important. I totally get that. This is a good example where I think I don't know that I would approach a big security project on a system that was old like this, simply because there are tools that have been born in the years that followed that make those types of activities a whole lot easier. So granted, the system works fine. I get it. It gets you from point A to point B, but at the end of the day, does it have all the bells and whistles? There have been security enhancements made in 7.2, security enhancements made in 7.3, and I know there's some coming in the next operating system release that is on the horizon. So, when we look at these systems side by side, certainly they're running your applications correctly, but this is an example where I think, Larry, I would bow to your side of the discussion a little bit, which is, let's get the system at least supported in semi-current so that the organization could take advantage of the controls. And here, I would say, certainly there are features that aren't available back in 6.1, and even software solutions. If you look at third-party tools, we try to support as far back as is reasonably possible. Certainly we support all IBM-supported operating system releases, but I do still have customers come to me and say, hey, we're interested in a particular tool or some type of function, and oh, by the way, we're on version 5.3. Can we buy it? And the answer is typically no, because there's only so far back that we can go in order to compile our applications. So when it comes to the vendor software, be it your application or line of business applications, or whether it's utility software like the PowerTech brand for our security tools, there's only so far we could go back. So this is an instance where I think, Larry, we would certainly push them towards newer hardware, newer operating system to ensure that they're on the latest and greatest, or at least as best they can be.
Yeah, at least have the capability needed. It might be row or column access security, like you were mentioning in the new features. Some of those things, they just don't exist in the older release, and you find out that for some compliance to meet a new customer that you've just taken on, we now need to have this. We need to meet this new set of compliance rules. Oops, can't do that on the old release. So sometimes it's a must do before you can get the security to even happen.
Absolutely. And now not only do I have to implement that control, but I have to do an OS upgrade and potentially hardware upgrades in a scramble in order to get that functionality to enact it. So then it becomes, a pressure of not just, hey, look, we've got a project we need to do. It's a multi-tiered project that is much more expensive and much more involved, and it's just better to kind of stay on that path as you go. It's less painful than jumping, 5 releases at once.
Exactly.
Now, part of that comes back, in my opinion, to the discussion around how do we keep people educated. And I think we do a pretty good job of giving people resources that will give them expertise when it pertains to OS upgrades. I know there's folks like yourself and Pete Masiello that speak extensively about upgrading hardware and the technology and the OS upgrades and things. What does it take for somebody to become, in essence, an IBMI administrator? What type of resources are out there that would give them the background? And is this a skill that's lacking? Is this something that we have an abundance of administrators that are available, or is this something that we need to work on? Where would folks go, whether they're the person or the firm trying to hire the person?
Well, so that's a really good question, and it's first just an observation. What we've seen over the past numbers of years is because the machine is reliable and because the machine tends to run itself, or people let it run itself, right? There's that. But what we find is that the administrator slot in many companies has disappeared. The official full-time employee guy who's an administrator. And then all of a sudden, and I've literally had this, I do a lot, as you mentioned, of education, and one of the things I've done a number of times is all-day education at Common or at other user groups, full-day system administration training. And I've literally had, in the one case, it was a woman, she came running in, and she says, I'm not really registered yet, but I have a check. I was just told, I'm a developer, and I was just given this hat. I'm now the administrator, too. Can I take the class? So that's what we're seeing is a lot of developers who they're not necessarily unwilling to be administrators. They just didn't plan on it. And so but you're at least
somebody has to show them how.
Yeah, but at least you're starting with somebody who knows how to spell IBM. So that's at least a good.
Or at least AS400.
At least, yeah, that's unfortunately too many of them say that.
So that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Don't go Trevor on me, man. So what we're seeing is, first off, as president of Common, I like to lead with Common, but the reasoning is sound. We have conferences, we have webinars, we have a lot of education. We have a very, very soon, as in probably in the next couple of weeks, a system administrator boot camp that will become available. And that's fantastic. 17 sessions of content covering, pretty much everything you can think of to be an administrator. And and a little bit of security, I might add, thrown in there, done by one of your partners. So that is, the training is out there. In addition, become members of things like the mid-range mailing list, for example, at midrange.com, where you can ask questions or you can just lurk. You can just watch people ask questions. And I learned stuff from that thing. I've been on the platform since it began, and I'll see somebody go, hey, did you know, how do I do this? And somebody else answers, well, try that. And you go, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, the community is definitely
that.
very supportive. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So
you mentioned hats, and I throw out this context when it comes to the security side of things is that there are very few IBMI security experts out there, and for many of us in the IBMI community, we don't get pigeonholed in a particular role. I know I started in the development space. I've been an engineer. I've done the OS upgrades and the hard drive swaps just like you have. But then kind of I've worked in other areas as well, and the security was an evolution for me. So I wasn't trained and hired as an IBMI security person. It just kind of evolved that way. And I think most of us have discovered that our careers have gone that way. We do end up in many different positions and learn as we go. From a security perspective, I think, the best thing is to get some exposure. If you're an administrator, if you're a developer and you have experience moving around the system and how a command works and the different aspects of library structure and objects and things like that, the actual evolution into the security discussion is actually not an overly difficult one. And I've said an expert here. I would offer that there are many, many things that can be done with at least a rudimentary understanding of the system. You don't necessarily have to be somebody who is speaking at conferences. It's a fun thing to do, so I certainly encourage you to take advantage if you get the opportunity. But ultimately, there are many things you can do in the base operating system with at least a base understanding of that environment. So there are resources. Common is a great one. As you know, Larry, I'm one of the SMEs on the security side as well, so certainly I agree with you wholeheartedly. But there's lots of other resources as well that can be made available through webinars and education sessions. You just have to kind of go out there and look. And if you have an interest, certainly that's something that the IBMI community will always support and steer people in the right direction. You mentioned hats, and I thought that was funny because I've always used the expression that most people in the IBMI community wear many hats, and I don't even know that it's one per day. It's usually multiple per day, and I think that's a valid thing. You can be a maintenance person and a security person. You may not be specialized in either one, but it's typically not a full-time job in each role. You just need to have that understanding, and that's what we encourage for people to take advantage of.
I totally agree with the hat thing. There's no doubt that it's accepting developers. Oddly enough, there are definitely developers who focus only on that because
Absolutely.
There's a lot more of them. But
yep,
the other
absolutely.
Hat,
so people concerned
hat
with
rack
that.
that you displayed. Yeah.
So one of the questions that I run into frequently on the security side is kind of this deer in the headlights look when we go through and we do a security assessment of an environment. People are a little intimidated at the idea that perhaps, the last 30 years where we've cut corners and really not paid attention and given much TLC to the security message is how do we get started? The big analogy for me is really just the idea I don't know what I don't know. And so if you are looking to kind of embark on some type of a security discovery, then for me, really it's about surrounding yourself with people that can assist. And Larry, you do a great job with your customers and getting their hardware installed and up and running in the latest technology in a way that I'm sure they would really struggle doing themselves, not just from a resource perspective, but just from a knowledge perspective. You can't do everything. And so on the security side, that's doubly true because we really haven't been exposed to it before. It was a case, throw a menu in front of the user and we're good to go. And that just ignores the fact that for the last 15 years or so, we've had the ability to download data directly, actually it's more than that, 25 years ago, the ability to download data directly to a PC. And we don't consider that or factor that in to our process. So do you have any suggestions for people of where to get started? I know I have a couple, and I'll throw them out in a second. But from a maintenance person's perspective, when it comes to working with the system, be it in maintenance or security, where do you suggest, just based on your knowledge of the IBMI community, where do they get started?
So for maintenance, we find that the two biggest things. And some people won't even believe this is true, but it's absolutely true. Find out, get your PTFs current, even if you don't update the OS. You may start with PTFs, get them things current. We've seen PTFs 5, 6 years old. And then after you fix them, people say, did you know this thing that didn't used to work, it fixed it? Because they hadn't done any PTFs forever. Unfortunately, people will upgrade the machine. So they went from Power 5 to Power 7, let's say, back in the day. And then when they put in their Power 7, they put in IBMI 7.1, and then they didn't do any PTFs ever since, because that's the one time every 3 years that they do PTFs, or 4, or 5. The second thing is test your backups. Most of you, and I could ask you to raise your hands, but you won't even raise your hands because even though we don't have access to your video camera, your backups suck. Now, some of you are smugly sitting there going, we do a Save 21 every night. And I want to shake your hand. That's awesome. If you can pull that off, and by the way, you do use a different tape every night, right? But backups so often in this environment, it's what somebody set up 10 years ago. And it's still running, and it doesn't save security data. We find that all the time. Well, my security data takes 5 hours to save, so I don't save that. What? That's a double fail. Why does it take 5 hours?
Yep.
And you should still be saving it. So those are two things that I start with is get your fixes current and make sure your backup is solid.
Yeah, great advice.
You can't fix, right, first two.
Yep. So the security side for me, the quick win is to get an assessment of the environment. That's always the first thing I suggest people do. Don't get lost in the details. You'll hear people espousing the benefits of row and column access control, and certainly I do appreciate the capability that brings to the table. But if we don't even have more than a one-character password, and I seriously saw more than a dozen of those last year, we haven't secured the system. We haven't secured the libraries on the system. We haven't secured the objects in the libraries. Why are we getting, hung up on the idea of securing a field within that file? So we don't want to get lost in the forest. What we want to do is work at this in a standard methodology so that we're not overwhelmed. And the quick wins are there. Things like exit programs, system values, setting up some library authority, making sure that your profiles don't all have all object with command line. There are some basic things that are, absolutely. Let's fix some of those basics before we worry about some of the nitty-gritty little controls. So while we talk about security and we talk about all these great things in IBMI, I think there is also a tendency that people just become so overwhelmed by it that they just bury their head in the sand and they don't do anything. So for me, it's about surrounding yourself with people that know this topic, be it professionally or through the forums and Twitter and other things, and it's about just starting down the road. You're not going to fix this overnight. Nobody suggests you will. But if you don't start, it's not going to be any better tomorrow. And it's kind of like losing weight, right? You make some adjustments. You've got to change how you do things so that you can stop the bad habits before you can start reversing some of the things that have been happening for the last 20 to 30 years. So absolutely there are quick wins, and we want people to take advantage of that, and certainly that's a conversation that I have with a lot of people. Now, the other discussion that's pretty common is, well, I don't have any full-time staff, or I've lost my staff, right? That's the big thing at the moment. They're retiring. And certainly we talk to people about how to source new people, and there's some great initiatives with Common and some of the colleges around the country to get people indoctrinated into the platform community. IBM's Fresh Faces program has been fantastic. But ultimately, how many of these people do we need? How many people need to administer the system? How many people need to secure the system? Larry, on the admin side, I mean, if I say I have half an administrator, is that enough? Do I need 3?
Well, I think if you look at the vast majority, and IBM doesn't release specific statistics, of course, but we all know that the lower-end machines, because especially they're so capable, probably comprise over 90% of the sales. So your company, chances are it fits in that 90% bucket. You have one IBMI server, one power system, probably one or maybe a couple, 3 partitions. We are seeing that grow. We get into the user acceptance testing as a separate development. But you don't need a full-time admin. You really don't. In that 90% slot, you don't need a full-time admin. You're probably only looking at a quarter of a person.
Yep.
Half of a person at the most. So that's the way we see it.
And I would argue that or not even argue, I would agree, I see it the same way on the security side. We've got some catching up to do. Like I said, we've got 20 to 30 years worth of bad practices we have to undo. So it does tend to seem like there is potential that we would need more. But on a regular, ongoing basis, on a system that is well-defined, it is really not necessarily a full-time job unless you're a large organization. The thing for me here, Larry, on both sides of this fence, the admin and the security side, is that your requirement for resources is going to be directly related to the automation that you put in place. If I am responsible for monitoring QSysOper all day long, it's probably going to be a full-time job of looking for probably nothing happening, but I got to look. If I can filter that and rule by exception, then I'm going to save myself probably multiple bodies of people. And it's the same thing on the security side. We're capable in the operating system of logging a tremendous amount of data into the audit journal, and it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. It would be more than a full-time job, and I would offer it would be such a miserable job that nobody would last more than a few days doing it, which is sadly why many of us don't. But the reality is, if we can put automation in place, if we've got some applications that will do the grunt work, the heavy lifting on our behalf, we then ultimately just become responsible for the final decision making. Hey, a disk drive has failed. I've got to initiate, or do I, right, a service call in order to resolve that issue. I don't need to be sitting there going, is it failing? Is it failing? Is it failing? And the same thing on the security side. Is there an authority failure? No. Okay, well, I'll look again in a split second. Let the tools do that. And I think that has a huge influence on the requirement for requiring human resources. And so as we see these folks retiring, which, great luck to them. They've invested a lot of time in this platform. We want to make sure that we're not losing capability when they retire, that we maintain that same visibility or arguably improve that visibility through a mindset of automation.
Well, and an add-on point there, which really just reinforces what you said, is if you think back to AS400, OS400, the number of potential messages, the number of things that could happen were low enough, and the available third-party tooling wasn't so much there, so a lot of people wrote their own tools back then.
Absolutely.
However, these days, there's stuff that I've seen in the audit journal going, no way, you can, really? And I love the audit journal because I sell disk. Right, that's a joke. But, today, you almost have to reach out and add tooling to do this because even though the tooling isn't free, it's cheaper than that person that you so correctly point out is going to quit before 2 days are done because they're sick of looking at history log, audit log, etc.
And with all due respect, they're going to miss stuff. I mean, I would not want to be the person responsible for looking for that needle in the haystack, because if I miss it, which a tool will not do, then there could be a lot riding on that. And so as we kind of evolve this, as we talk about, automation things, we talk, of course, as part of this debate as to, we recognize that there's value in both sides of this. So we kind of came across that in the Smackdown last year, right, was that ultimately there is a place for both. But I think the question really now has become, which comes first? Is there a requirement to administer the system, get those projects done, and then treat security as kind of a follow-on? Or do we secure the platform and then worry about the OS upgrades, the hardware, things like that? Is there something delineating that for you, Larry, that helps us understand the priority that we should apply to this?
Yeah, so that's absolutely what we hit in the Smackdown, as you say. And I honestly think, and I'm the admin guy, although I do look a lot at security. I'm not that security expert, but as a role in your role as an admin, you're automatically part of security. You are. You can't ignore that. And so I think the truth is that you almost have to say security first, and then the big asterisk, except. And the except then is when you can't. So my hardware's too old, I can't get to a new supported release. My PTFs are too old, they don't support the feature that I need for my security. My OS is too old, I don't have the features needed, whether it's RCAC, whether it's TLS 1.2, whether it's whatever feature, but I can't do it. So if there is a roadblock in the way that's caused by your OS, your fixed levels, or your hardware, admin has to come first. Yep. Because you can't get there, right? I can't cross the river if there's no bridge, and I don't own a boat. So then I think it's admin. But I think, honestly, it really does come down to, because, as we've said so many often, we're doing an upgrade in 3 months. Let's look at security later. It's always later.
And I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. I think for me, the answer is always, it depends. Right? I certainly try to instill in people that security should not take a back seat, especially medium long term. In the short term, there may be things that absolutely make sense to do the administration side first. For example, somebody comes to me and they're on version, version 6. No, let's go with version 7, and they want to do some object level security. And I'm going to encourage them to get to a release that supports what we call authority collection, which is 7.3, in order to perform that type of lockdown in a much more effective, less problematic way, because at 7.3, the operating system will give you much more information about how much authority a user actually needs. So rather than the speculation that then runs the risk of breaking a perfectly good application, which is what tends to scare people off of security in the first place. We have the operating system helping us with that task. So it totally makes sense to get to 7.3 first and then do that. For me, the only caveat is, if you're just simply making a decision based on, well, what has more visibility, or, I've got limited resources, where do I apply them? Unfortunately, we tend to still see security as less than an enhancement. I can spend the money and I can implement a new project that will increase my sales by 20%, and there's still a mindset that security is not adding value or dollars to the bottom line. But I always offer up, it's preventing dollars being taken away from the bottom line, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So it's a balance, and to me, the argument is it depends on many factors, and I think that's where it's speaking to experts and getting some sense of experience in that conversation, rather than being one of the victims of you don't know what you don't know. Talk to somebody who does know, and I think that way you get some insight in perhaps ways that you wouldn't normally get yourself.
Yeah, and
All right.
it also it feeds a bit like insurance. Insurance is very often all or nothing. My house did or didn't burn down. I did or didn't get hacked. As long as I don't get hacked, my lack of investment in security looks pretty good, doesn't it?
Yeah,
right
absolutely.
up until it doesn't. It's a nanosecond later. We've been hacked. Well, what's our security plan? Too late.
The ROI on security the day before a hack is zero. The day after, it's infinite. So there's definitely a large swing in the pendulum possible there, and what we're trying to do is just prevent that from being a painful experience. Now, Larry, this kind of extends on that. There is certainly an interconnection, in my opinion, between security and administration, and that's why, as much as we joke and tease one another, there really is a heavy reliance on both sides. And I think we've spoken to this a little bit on the security side. I don't know if you have anything you want to add from an admin side, but the interconnected aspects to me are that we do encourage. I mean, I'm a software vendor in this space. I have a number of security applications, amongst other things, that obviously are going to benefit a customer, whether or not they have implemented object-level security or that they have auditing turned on. But at the end of the day, I always offer that the tooling will work better if it's built on a solid foundation. And that solid foundation is the operating system. It is our beloved IBM I. And so for me, maintaining currency in the operating system is giving us the bells and the whistles that we need in order to stay current in a rapidly changing world. The threat matrix and the risk exposure changes almost constantly, that we have to ensure that we're keeping these capabilities up. And you brought up the SSL versus TLS or TLS 1.0 versus higher levels. It's absolutely true. We've got to stay interconnected in a way so that we are bolstering one another rather than undermining what the other side does.
Yeah, without question. And if you get the PTF emails from IBM, and you can subscribe to those for free, quite often you'll see, here's a vulnerability, it's been detected in this or that feature. By the way, we use that. OpenSSH is a classic example. There's a PTF for that. You should get this PTF. So there's system administration, it's getting the PTF, but what's it applied to? It's applying to keeping your system secure.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
So, Janine, why don't we open up a second survey here just to get some feedback from these good folks as to what is deemed as kind of a top priority between security and hardware and OS upgrades. So this is really more of a management perception, or at least decision-maker perception, I guess, as to what is a top priority now. And maybe this has changed over time, but I guess I'm interested in where it stands in 2019, because certainly I am seeing kind of a mind shift gradually towards the idea that recognition that whether it's voluntarily being done or whether it's a mandate from a compliance regulation, that there's really a decision that people are making. Let's improve things. Let's invest in security and to kind of undo some of these things. And I know from the admins that I talk to, Larry, there's really a desire to do this, and it's about selling it to the people that are writing the checks and are allocating budgets.
Well, and that's the huge thing, is it's easy to, as a good friend of mine likes to say, shiny object. I've got a brand new Power 9. That's so much easier to talk to the boss about, and it's going to have more of these speeds and more of those feeds and, all of those numbers we sling around. And
it leaks data way faster than the old machine, right?
Yes, exactly. You could download a whole customer file now in 6.2 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Robin, I'm going to go ahead and send these results out to the audience.
See, the thing to me that's very encouraging about the results here is that the winning number is it depends. And I'm actually glad to hear that, because there, like I said, are times where each side of this equation needs to take precedence. Ultimately, we just want to make sure that it doesn't fall to one or the other as a long-term and exclusionary conversation that is leaving one or other off the table, because it's really something that we need to move forward with on both sides. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for that feedback. So, Larry, we've just got a couple minutes here, and I know we've got a couple questions that people have asked, so I don't want to spend too much time here, and so I put short story. Anything in particular that you've come across with regards to admin and or security in your travels and your extensive experience working with your customers that folks might be interested in hearing?
So the administration one, my favorite one is the guy who, they put in a machine, they put it in at V5R4, they kept SWAMA active on the thing, and all the way through extended SWAMA on V5R4, they never put on a PTF. And they said, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But what they were having was their handheld laser weapons, the scanner devices in the warehouse. They would only stay online for a day or so, and then they would fall off, and they'd have to go get another one from the office. And until it got to be about Wednesday, and then they would IPL the machine, and then everyone would work again. And to make a long story shorter, the bottom line was there were PTFs that came out only a few months after they installed the machine that fixed an ARP table refresh problem, and that one PTF would have saved them tens of thousands of dollars over many years, because this problem went on for 6 years. They bought additional guns, so there were enough laying on the shelf for people to keep busy. They disrupted the business with IPLs multiple times a week. They got frustrated and all this, and all they really needed to do was PTFs. Wow.
Certainly a simple fix, right? You just got to identify it up front. For me, the security one is we had a customer who had a viral infection in the Service Pack update program that was part of Client Access. For many of you running Client Access, probably still, when your PC first connects, it does a service check to see if the file or the application on the IFS is more current than the one on your PC, and it kind of does an auto update. That executable was infected, and so every time the PC went into this update, it actually was reinfecting the PC, and it took them actually quite a long time to figure out the source of the infection, because every day they'd have this outbreak, they'd go out and they'd cleanse it, and the next day it would all go down again. And it just goes to show that sometimes where we're kind of putting less emphasis ends up being the pain point. And like you say, Larry, even with something as simple as a PTF, we could have solved that problem much more easily. So this conversation, I think, much more elegant and sophisticated perhaps than the Smackdown of 18, and I appreciate you joining me, Larry, to perhaps keep me honest in regards to what comes first. For you, what is the key takeaway? I think from me as a security person is, it really depends. There are a number of quick wins. We've got to look both of these things square in the eye and make sure that our plan accommodates both sides of the house, not one to the exclusion of the other. And I think that's the big lesson I have to keep reminding myself. We're all one big happy family. We're running on this platform. It is fantastic technology, but it is not entirely hands-off. It does take some TLC, and it's up to us as the community to make sure that it thrives in that way.
Yeah, I would agree that it is, security and administration, hand in glove, as we say. Most of the time it's the same head wearing two different hats, and some days both hats are on at the same time. And I think the other piece is constantly review where you're going, because we still see this. My IBMI is not connected to the internet. Next month I have to support data connected to the internet. How am I going to do that? What changes in my security for that? What it really is that it is so hand in glove. You cannot do one without affecting the other. And
I think be realistic, right? I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to. So, Larry, it's a little unfair for me perhaps to be the one to do it, but I think that you would agree when we talk about debating things like this, the clear winner is anybody running on the platform. IBMI is such an amazing technology, hardware and software-wise, and we're very fortunate to have all of these capabilities continually growing, being invested in, and it's just up to us as the community to take advantage. So be happy that you're able to run on IBMI. There are many reasons to stay on the platform, and I'm glad to see in many instances people are growing their footprint and doing different things. So it's exciting to see, and definitely brings us all out as winners. So I would offer up that the Twitter hashtag that we came up with of security or maintenance really should be security and maintenance. They're not mutually exclusive. Ultimately, we have risk on IBMI, and we have to recognize that. We've got a lack of awareness of security, typically on the platform, and we also have a lack of awareness of the platform in the security industry, and this is really causing a bit of an issue for us that we have to get to the root cause of. And it's not that hard to do. There's a lot of data on the system that needs to be secured, and there's many ways that we can do that easily. Lots of information out there. We do the State of Security study. We're working on the 2019 study right now, so take advantage of those resources. Carol Woodbury has a fantastic book on IBMI security that if you do have an interest in security, take advantage of that as well, and I put links in here so that you can access copies of those, but you can Google search them as well. Larry, 10 seconds, Power Up, coming May 19th through the 22nd. What should people know?
Well, we've got, it is a fantastic conference. We'll have probably around 1,000 people. We've got over 300 sessions. In addition, we have pre-conference workshops that will be on the day before, so on May 18. And, it'll be another tremendous opportunity to interact with experts in the field, your peers in the field, which is a phenomenal place to learn. And, of course, with IBM and all the other amazing vendors that we have in the IBMI space that come out to provide both knowledge and products to the IBMI space. So join us.
Absolutely. I will be there, guaranteed. From a security side, Help Systems, I'm not going to spend too much time, but Help Systems has really invested in this. So this is potentially a software message, it's a skills, it's a knowledge transfer message. There's a lot of value that we can bring to the table here that I think people should and often do take advantage of, but we want to make sure that's happening. From the software side, there's a lot of different capabilities. I could talk about that all day, but there's really one that I want to leave you with, which is the security scan. This is a tool that we allow you to use at no charge. It will give you a really good discovery of your current configuration in 7 different areas of security, and you can run this. It takes about 30 seconds to run, if that, for the most part, and we'll spend about an hour with you on a WebEx. I'll go through it line by line with you and explain everything that it found, and it's really a great way to kind of take that first step, dip your toe in the water, say, what am I facing here? What should I be thinking about? We do invite you to take advantage of that. All right, and you can check all that out at helpsystems.com. You can sign up for the scan there. There is also a lot of documentation. It's not all Help Systems product oriented. There's a lot of education material out there because I am very passionate about this platform, and I feel that it's about education and sharing knowledge, and that allows you to make good business decisions. All right. So I know we're a little bit over here, Janine. From a question perspective, I know I had a couple come in, and I can get to those here. So if folks are still hanging with me, let me touch on those so that we can make sure we get answers to them. I'm going to change my panel here. And Larry, this is probably a little bit to both of us. Security, one of the top reasons people moving to Power 9. What are thoughts on that? I'm guessing that comes back a little bit to the chip vulnerabilities and the pretty well documented pain points that I think have been seen over the last couple of years. I know some of the IBMers have been fighting this discussion for a long time. Do you have any thoughts on Power 9 and the chip security in that regard?
Yeah, so the Spectre and Meltdown are the two guys,
Yep.
right? Bad actors in the field. One of the things that's caused us is the patches, the fixes, because it's firmware for your power system as well as patches in IBM I. In theory, that's slowed the system down a bit. Most customers haven't noticed that, but by stepping up to Power 9, you're back up into more powerful chip. Those vulnerabilities are not completely patched in Power 9 hardware yet, because they, if you don't follow that, the design of the chip is several years ahead of the production of the chip. That should be no surprise. So, but we are definitely seeing that.
Yep.
It does reduce that impact because of the faster chips again. So.
Yeah. From my perspective, I always offer up, yes, they're important, and Power 9 is going to be beneficial, and it's the performance to offset some of the controls that you put in play. But just remember that, hacking a chip is going to be much higher level. It's more likely that somebody's going to simply sign on with one of the 300 profiles that have a default password on your system. So we don't have to manipulate bits and bytes and chipsets if all we do is sign on to the box, right? So just remember that, because we want to put that in perspective, and security comes at it from all sides. All right, well, Janine, I think that's all that we've got time for, and probably less than that, but I just want to hand it back over to you. I thank you, Larry, for joining me, sticking your head up here, and keeping me honest, and look forward to speaking to all of you again soon.
Thank you, Robyn.
Thanks, Robyn.
I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Also, a special thanks to Robyn and Larry for sharing their expertise with us today. Please watch for a follow-up email in the coming days. It will contain a link to a recording of today's event. Thanks again for joining us. That concludes our webinar. Have a great day.